Hello, everyone. This is Professor Jonathan Zeiss. It is Thursday, August 26th, and I am here to talk about the roots of theater. So let's just dive right in, shall we? So, oop, meh. so the roots of theater. Why theater? Where does it come from? Why did animals we call human beings do an activity we call theater? Now, in order to answer that question, right, I kind of have to figure out an idea at least of what theater is. And where's a good place to start of definitions of things? Well, let's look at dictionaries. However, when you look at different dictionaries of theater, they don't agree on some, I think, pretty important parts. Just like if I were to ask you all in a classroom setting what you think of what is theater, you would all give different answers as well. And I'm showing you this to say that you're in pretty good company and that there isn't necessarily a right answer. Here is just an example of a whole bunch. Sorry. Google, what is theater? It is a play or other activity or presentation considered in terms of its dramatic quality. The Merriam-Webster dictionary says it is dramatic representation as an art or profession. Encyclopedia Britannica, an art concerned almost exclusively with live performances in which the action is precisely planned to create a coherent and significant sense of drama. Britannica is long-winded. Cambridge says it is the writing or performance of plays, opera, etc., written to be performed in public. Oxford says that theater is plays considered as entertainment. Now, yes, in a lot of these definitions, you can get an idea of what theater is, at least according to these folks, and probably according to most people. It has something to do with art. It has something to do with performance. It has something to do with intention. It has something to do with story. It has something to do with entertainment. But I want to just draw your attention to um, two different things. Um, what at its base does Google say a theater that theater is? Okay, what is the noun that they use and then describe that noun? Google says that theater is a play or other activity or presentation. Okay, so it is a thing, right? Merriam-Webster says theater is dramatic representation. So it's not activity, it is representation. Britannica calls it an art. Okay, so theater is not primarily a play or activity or presentation. Primarily, it is an art. Okay. Cambridge says it is the writing or performance of. Okay. So it has two different things, right? Oxford says that it is plays. Now, notice Google and Oxford say that theater is plays or other activities. Right? Britannica says it is an art, Merriam-Webster, a representation. They can't even decide necessarily on what, at its core, theater is. Is it an art? Is it a representation? Is it an activity? What is it? And looking further on and a little bit more nuanced look at these definitions of what theater is, who decides? Who determines? Um, can you make theater on accident? That would be a good question to ask. Um, Google would answer that. Sure, you can make art on accident, or you can make theater on accident if something that is done is considered in terms of its dramatic quality. Something can become theater if you consider it in those terms. Hmm. Now, um, Cambridge would disagree. Cambridge would say it is the writing or performance of plays written to be performed in public. So the person who decides if it is theater is the person doing the writing or performing. It is their intent, not someone else's consideration. Because you cannot accidentally write something that is written to be performed in public. You can't accidentally write something intending it, you know, an accident and intent are, not the same thing. So who decides what theater is? If you write a play and it is never performed, if you start to write something and it is never performed by anyone, is it theater? Merriam-Webster would say, no, it isn't, because it is not representing anything. It is not dramatic representation. right? Cambridge would say, yes, it is. A play that you wrote is theater, right? Because it is the writing of something that is written to be performed, right? And these are all splitting hairs, I understand. But they are hairs worth splitting, not to try to narrow down and come to one specific definition, what is theater, but to explore what people think theater is, and that it is a messy cluster of things. There will be different things that we discuss in class that some people have considered theater and some absolutely have not considered theater, right? There's things in real life in that way too. So not only is theater hard to define, and incidentally, for the purposes of our class, I'm not going to expect you to memorize any of these definitions as the true one, right? We all kind of know what we're talking about. And so then let's go to, so dramatic words have made their way into all different parts of our lives, right? We call, a natural disaster a tragedy, right? Now, a tragedy is originally used to describe essentially a play, a type of play that is sad, that shows someone's downfall, right? And a low note, right? It is originally used to describe the drama itself, the profession, the art. But we look at a disaster and we think that is tragic. So we say it is a tragedy, right? We talk about drama being something that we want to avoid, not just kind of, oh, I don't like theater, so I don't like drama, but also in people. People can have qualities that are dramatic, right? That are theatrical. Even interesting, I like talking about the word upstage because we all know what it means. It means to like kind of steal the spotlight from, right? But to steal the attention that someone else deserves. But where does that come from? It comes from from the stage, right? The directions when you're on stage toward the audience is downstage, away from the audience is upstage. And the reason that is because in some theaters, in order to get the audience who's on the ground to see the performers, the stage was arced, or it was raked like this. So the front of the stage is literally lower than the back of the stage, right? And so if you and I are talking and we're on the same kind of level, the same distance away from the audience, and if we're talking to each other, and then I start moving upstage of you, what you have to do in order to keep talking to me is to turn away from the audience. And so I am upstaging you by my movement. I am forcing the audience to look at me instead of you, right? That is upstaging. And obviously, because it is very literally about the geography and terminology used on stage. It's interesting. We talk about making a scene. I said steal a spotlight or spotlight this. You talk about people as having, oh, he's such a character, and even talking about someone being a hypocrite, right? From the Greek Hippocrates, or actor. Okay. Talking about making a scene actually comes from a piece of architecture in the Greek theater, weirdly enough. And we'll talk about that later too. So theatrical language has infiltrated all sorts and different parts of our lives too. Now, if I were to ask you what this is, just think for a second, right? We could have a couple of different answers and none of them are necessarily right or wrong. One thing that it is, a blue dot, another blue dot next to it, and below that, at about the same width, kind of a semicircle and an arc, with the middle at the low. And that is true. Another thing that we all see, some people have what is it? A visual agnosia, which is a thing where shapes don't convalesce into understanding what a meaning of different shapes and different patterns are. But this is a smiley face. Pretty obviously, we would all recognize it as such. And if we see that, we see two dots and a line underneath. We don't just see the geometry. We don't just see the relationship between the colors. We see expression. We see emotion, right? We see intent. We see story. Likewise, if I show you these three shapes arranged, in the same order and just three red rectangles, there's a very different story, a very different emotion, right? A very different feeling and different narrative that this shows you, right? So all that is used to illustrate human beings like looking for stories. It is a natural, integral part of who we are to interpret what we see and to build stories around it, right? And to think about meaning and intention behind things, right? So if instead of showing you geometric shapes to try to figure out what now this means, we can also, we are also very much primed and very good at um, showing a picture and figuring out what just happened, right? Something actually that it is used um, it's kind of a Turing test thing. Sometimes they ask, like a computer, what just happened? And they can't necessarily say if they're a person. If they're shown, for example, this picture, we can tell a lot about what just happened. Now, what is happening now? What does this show? Well, there is a basketball player who is, whose wrists, elbows, knees, and feet are all on the ground. This basketball player is looking down, and this basketball player is wearing yellow. We also have a number of basketball players to the right who are standing up, wearing a different color and embracing each other. Also on the left, we see a mascot. You can tell by the furry tail and the fact that the mascot's name is Harry, also being embraced by someone. We see in the background a number of people, kind of in the fog back there, out of focus, who are also wearing the same color as the basketball players that are standing up. And they also seem to be, touching each other's hands and this sort of thing. Now, that is all literally what is going on in this picture, right? But we absolutely can infer what just happened, right? The yellow team probably just lost, right? Hayward here on the ground, number 32, maybe something. He may have had something to do with it. He probably was on the floor when their team lost. We can probably assume that this is either a very close game or a very meaningful game, either in terms of a rivalry or, championship or something like that, or both, right? We see this figure in the forefront and we know a little bit about what they're feeling. We don't even see their face, but by everything, we kind of know the story of what they are feeling. Again, human beings tell stories and it is automatic and natural. We don't even have to try to do it. We don't even have to intend to look at this picture and intentionally think to ourselves, well, what just happened? No, we do it automatically. We look at this picture, oh, the yellow team lost. So we tell stories all the time, right? Even to each other, narrative stories. We tell them for different reasons. We entertain each other. Hey, you won't believe what I did last night, X, Y, and Z. To educate people, right? Hey, when I worked at that job that you're thinking about taking the position at, this happened, X, Y, and Z. To comfort people, hey, you know what? When my gerbil died, too, this is what happened with me. This is how I got through it, X, Y, Z. To mislead, right? It's like, no, I did not I did not wash the towels with your sweater intentionally. I was admiring the sweater and I thought you made a really good decision purchasing it. But because I had already put in the towels, my hands were a little soapy and the sweater just slipped, right? And because I know that sweater is very important to you and because I was trying not to get it with the towels, I rushed over and tried to get my hands, but I accidentally knocked the washing machine with my knee and the cover fell down, and we have one of those new washing machines that actually locks so you can't open it once it started, and that's how your sweater got washed with the towels. Okay, it's a story that we tell to mislead or embellish, right? Obviously, but we don't only tell stories to each other, right? We don't only tell narratives, this happened because this, or and then this happened, but we also tell them to ourselves when we're thinking about the future, right? When you're playing dress up as a kid, I have two kids, when they play dress up, they are imagining what it would be like to be a doctor or a firefighter or whatnot, right? What would I do in this situation? What might happen if I were a doctor? What kinds of things would I do? What kinds of stories could I tell? Even when we make more adult things, when we think of about a major in college, it's not just what words we want on our diploma. We tell our story about what will my life be like? What do I think will happen? What will result as this? who to date, even when, you're naming your kid. Um, you want to give a child a name that you couldn't make fun of as a third grader, right? Because you don't want that story to happen. Right? And obviously, after an insult, we think to ourselves, "Oh man, if I said this, and if only I would have said this, this would have been great." So, one of the reasons why we do these things is because human beings, just like all other, living beings, are comfortable with order. Right? We like things to be predictable. We like to be able to control things too, because the less chaos that is in our lives, the more we can plan, the more that we can predict, and the better things will be. However, the world is unpredictable, right? And so there's a disconnect. We really want things to be predictable, but things aren't. So, how do we reconcile the two? Sometimes we might seek reasons as to why unpredictable things that happen were actually predictable if you look at them in the right way. Right? Some of these might be superstitions, right? It is unpredictable if, let's say, a beam falls down, but it would be predictable if the reason is we say it's because you said the name of the Scottish play, right? Um, who wins and loses over the course of hockey playoffs or something is unpredictable, but we are more comfortable if we think, well, you know what? If I grow out my beard, if I wear my cap backwards, then I can make this unpredictable thing. I can have a little bit of control over it because it matters and it's out of my hands. So how do I put it back into my hands? Right? And we were obviously the same in the past, right? In the people that we, our ancestors who developed theater, to them as well, predictability and reliability. Um, uh, uh, those were all very important too. Tribe, clan, family survival, and culture was very important too, because with culture comes predictability, right? And it comes order, and it comes the same things have happened, so you know what to expect later. And how do you pass down a culture's teachings, stories about their heroes, and these sorts of things? How do you tell stories to bring some sort of order and control over things that you do not have control over? How do you do that? Right? Through things like ritual and ceremony. Right? Rituals, and these are what theater gets sprung out of: rituals and ceremonies. Now, rituals are symbolic actions performed by a community, usually spiritual or cultural. They are arranged in patterns that ultimately become precise, not necessarily uh, um, intricate or complicated, but precise. And they might be performed to achieve magical effects, right? We cannot do something, our ancestors could not do something directly to make it rain. We couldn't do that. But what we could do is we could perform a ceremony that might affect the things that we imagine can make it rain as well. So we do things, we tell these stories, we do these rituals to affect the unseen, to then affect the seen. And we see these getting, stepping out of the realm of theory and into the realm of history, right? In history, the theatrical tradition came from everywhere, right? We are all going to start in this class with the Greek springtime rituals, right? The city Dionysia, rituals honoring the god Dionysus. In India, in the subcontinent, priests performed to honor gods, Brahma, Vishnu, and Siva. In China, monks were hired by farmers to perform agricultural rituals, again, to do something in this world, to affect something in the other world that then will affect another thing in this world we can't control. The Japanese no theater came from religious and agricultural festivals. In Africa, the Yorubans believed that one of their gods, Ogun, was the first actor because they assumed human form to help save them. In medieval Europe, passion plays were born out of cathedrals, telling the story of the passion. In the Americas, the Mayan people performed dramas to honor the sun gods and reenact the Popol Vuh, a creation myth. So everywhere, from the Americas to India to Europe to China to Africa, everywhere, theater popped up from these kind of cultural rituals and storytelling. Speaking of the Maya, the Rapinal Aki. And I love telling this because this is a bit of information that most people, when they take this class, do not know. We have one extant play from the pre-Columbian Americas. Now, when I say pre-Columbian, it just means before Europeans arrived, before Columbus, pre-Columbian. Right? There have obviously been many plays post-Columbian in the Americas, like, you know, Hamilton. But from pre-Columbian, one of the difficulties was that a lot of the Europeans who came over forbade the performance of a lot of these rituals and burned a lot of copies of what would have been the narrative scripts. And so extant, incidentally, extant means we have the script. We have a script of it. There's plays that we know of that are older in other parts of the world, but this is a play that we have. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on when we talk about the theatrical traditions of the Americas. The oldest play that we know of, that we have a name for, was the Abydos Passion Play. It is the oldest recorded theatrical performance that we know of, right? There's always a chance that something else could crop up. It was written in Egypt in the 3rd millennia BCE. It's called the Abydos Passion Play because it was performed at Abydos, which is an important religious site. It is a passion play because it depicts the myth of the god Osiris, who incidentally was performed by the pharaoh as an actor. The pharaoh of Egypt was an actor in this, performing the role of the god Osiris, being killed by his brother Set and being resurrected by Isis. It contained masks and dance. We know that this play occurred, not because we have the script, but because we have, in hieroglyphs and paintings, representations of a play happening, and the name of that play that these pictographic depictions represent. So that's the oldest the oldest play that we know of, although we don't have a script. So that leads us to this fellow, Plato. And Plato is where we are going to start the first thread of really the narrative that is going to take us through the theater history portion of Intro to Theater. Now, one thing I do want to acknowledge, right? Why, if theater cropped up everywhere in the world, do we start and throughout the course focus on Europe and the Americas? And that is an important question to ask. And for me, the reason is because theater today, as we know it today, was influenced by the cultural path that began in ancient Greece, more so, not primarily, but more so than others. And the reason is not because the Greeks were better at it, although they were very good, but it's not because they were better. It's not because Greek theatrical theory, dramatic criticism is more valuable than, say, the Natya Shastra from ancient India. But it's just because that's the one that has survived by means fair and also unfair, because the Europeans were not nice to the cultural traditions of other people that they encountered. But at any rate, we're starting with Plato. Now, Plato, yes, that Plato was a philosopher that lived in ancient Greece. He wrote a lot. People talk about Plato a lot. But for the purposes of this, what did he think about theater? What did Plato think about theater? Plato is not a fan of theater for a number of reasons. Because, and I said, the first plays that were written in ancient Greece and performed in ancient Greece were people telling stories about gods and goddesses, and you would necessarily have to have depictions, actors portraying these gods and goddesses. Depictions of gods as having human-like personalities and flaws debased the gods, and that is bad. That is kind of Plato's blasphemy argument. Gods are perfect. How dare you depict them as not being perfect? Okay. Bad actor. He also said theater as an art form because it involved dance, music, and other things that were not capital R reasonable, right? That were unreasonable and based upon, passions and intuitions and emotion, these sorts of things. And because it was shown to a big crowd of people, and crowds, when individual people in a crowd are acting unreasonable, oh, you'd better believe that the crowd itself will also act even more unreasonable and irrational, capital R, I guess capital I-R, irrational. It was likely to inflame the passions of the youth, and here we have the, the consistent, eternal bad art for inflaming the passions of the youth argument. But he also had more not just like, oh, the kids these days and oh, it's blasphemy, so don't do it arguments. He actually had a philosophical argument for why theater was bad. Um, and we might think of it as a modern um, conception of theater to think like when you're in a role, you somehow take part of the role with you in the rest of your day, or even after you're done playing a role, you still have a part of that character with you along through the rest of your life. We think of that as kind of a modern method acting adjacent conception of theater, but Plato thought of it, before, way before Strasbourg. He says actors cannot portray debased or wicked people without it influencing their actions and personality in real life, right? And you don't want to do that. If the idea is to be the best possible person that you can be, why would you perform an activity and portray someone if you know that their wickedness will become a part of you? Why would it be good at all to intentionally do something that you know will leave a residual wickedness to you? You shouldn't do that, says Plato. He also had, and philosophy people, forgive me, please, for the incredible oversimplification of the theory of forms, right? Forgive me. But let's say you have a chair, right? You're looking at a chair. I am looking at a chair. I might be looking at a different chair, but we both are looking at chairs. Why? If we're looking at two different objects, how do we know that we're both looking at chairs? Well, Plato thought, well, okay, there is things about your chair that are inherently chairness. There's things that aren't necessarily, right? A chair doesn't have to be red. That is not an intrinsic quality of chairness. But there is something about it that makes you recognize it and know it as a chair. Just like me, there is the same quality, the same chairness that is present in your chair and is present in mine. They might look different, but there is something that they share in common. And Plato thought in order for this thing to be shared in common, it itself needs to exist, right? There has to be some quality of chairness that is the purest, most perfect form. And applying that to people and professions, um, you need to try to be the purest, most perfect form of whatever you choose to be, right? The perfect fisher strives to be the best fisher. The perfect farmer strives to be the best farmer. The perfect philosopher strives to have perfect philosophy and the best possible reason, uncontaminated with other things. Now, the problem with actors is that they have to learn a lot of different things. An actor one day needs to learn how to perform as Dionysus. The next day, they need to perform as a woodcutter. The next day, a mason. The next day, a merchant. And if you're doing all these things, how could you possibly be the best you can be at one? You can't. And so, because actors necessarily need to try to learn and try to be more than one thing, they are less perfect in everything. Right? So, that is a philosophical reason why actors, no, bad actors. And he said in his Republic, now Plato wrote a a work called the Republic, where he describes what the ideal society would be like. And he says, and therefore, when any of these pantomimic gentlemen, and I will pause and note that he says gentlemen, and that is gendered language. We will see gendered language pop up throughout theater history. It is unfair, but we need to recognize it and recognize it as unfair and untrue. So he says, and whenever one of these pantomimic gentlemen who are so clever that they can imitate anything, actors, comes to us and makes a proposal to exhibit himself and his poetry, his and his, we will fall down and worship him as a sweet and holy and wonderful being. But we must also inform him that in our state, such as he are not permitted to exist. The law will not allow them. And so when we have anointed him with myrrh and set a garland of wool upon his head, we shall send him away to another city. So in a perfect society, according to Plato, when any of these actors come by and say, hey, we want to put on a play, we'll say to them, you're a cool dude, but you need to get your bags packing, because here you are not permitted to exist. Ooh, Plato, harsh guy. Now, the reason that I bring up Plato is mainly because of the person who comes after Plato, one of his students, Aristotle. Yes, that Aristotle. Aristotle wrote the most influential and famous bit of dramatic criticism of all time. It is known as the Poetics. And when you read the Poetics, I think it is instructive and illuminating to understand what Aristotle in the Poetics was reacting to. Right? Plato was his teacher. And so Aristotle was taught all of this. Theater is bad. Actors shouldn't be allowed to exist in our society. And Aristotle has something very, very different to say. But I will leave you there. I'm going to put up the discussion questions. They should be there by the time you see this. Please, do the discussions. It's part of your work. Hope you all are doing great, are doing well. If you have any questions for me, please feel free to email them, or even write in the comments of the discussion. I will see you all later. Cheers. And where's the stop recording button? It is there.